Chapter 1. The Unearthed Secret. The morning sun beat down on the dusty stretch of Route 19, turning the air into a shimmering haze above the asphalt. Road crews had been at it since dawn, tearing up a worn section of highway to make way for new drainage lines. Machines growled and groaned, and men in neon vests shouted over the noise of heavy equipment. For them, it was just another grueling shift under the relentless heat. But that morning would become something else, entirely an ordinary workday destined to enter the realm of legend. The backhoe's teeth scraped across something that wasn't supposed to be there. Not rock, not soil, but metal. A jarring screech rang out, sharp enough to send shivers through everyone nearby. The operator cursed, thinking he'd hit an old pipe. He pulled back, dirt crumbling away in clumps, until the shape revealed itself. A roof of rust, half collapsed, and the faint glint of glass catching the light. At first, the crew thought it was nothing more than another junked car, one of the countless abandoned wrecks buried along forgotten rural roads. But as more of the dirt was peeled away, the reality became undeniable. The crushed frame of a vehicle lay half buried beneath decades of soil and tar, its skeleton as weathered as the bones that would soon be found inside. The foreman, a heavy-set man with a sunburnt neck, pulled out his phone with trembling fingers. "This ain't in the blueprints," he muttered, as if the earth had betrayed him. "Call the sheriff, now." By the time detectives Riley Monroe and Daniel Vega arrived, the scene was crawling with deputies. Yellow tape fluttered in the wind, stretched across jagged chunks of asphalt. A cluster of construction workers stood at a distance, their faces pale, their voices hushed. Everyone could feel the weight of time pressing down on the grave that had just been opened. Riley ducked under the tape. She was in her mid-30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, though dark circles beneath them hinted at sleepless nights. She'd seen enough bodies in her career to know this discovery wasn't going to be simple. Cold cases never were. Her partner, Daniel Vega, trailed behind. Younger, only a few years on the job, his nervous energy buzzed just beneath his calm exterior. He carried a small notebook in his jacket pocket, a habit picked up from old-school detectives. The car was a wreck, its paint long gone, the body eaten away by rust, but enough remained to identify its make and model. A Buick Regal, early 1980s. The windshield was shattered inward, caked with soil. Inside, what little remained of the interior was a tomb. Riley crouched, shining her flashlight through the windowless frame. Her breath caught. Bones. The skeleton slumped against the driver's seat, ribcage half crushed, jaw open in a silent scream. Tangled in the passenger seat was another figure, smaller, curled into itself as if in eternal defense. "Two of them," Riley said softly. Vega shifted uncomfortably. "Christ, how long do you think it's been here?" Riley scanned the rusted edges, the layers of dirt. Decades. Forensics began their careful work, brushing away soil, cataloging every fragment. A corroded license plate was pried loose from the bumper, and one of the deputies called out the faded numbers. Within minutes, a VenCheck confirmed what Riley had already suspected. The car was reported missing in 1984. Vega flipped open his notebook. 84. That's 40 years ago. Riley nodded. Before either of us were even in high school. The sheriff, a stocky man with a thinning hairline, approached. "We'll run it through the database, but don't expect miracles. Records that old, well, half of them aren't even digitized." As the remains were carefully lifted from the wreck, Riley noticed something protruding from the glove compartment, its door warped but not fully shut. She pulled on a pair of latex gloves and eased it open. A puff of stale air escaped, carrying with it the faint, sweet smell of mold and paper. Inside was a bundle of decayed maps, brittle as dead leaves, and tucked between them something more personal, a photograph. The edges were yellowed and curling, the surface cracked with age, but the image was still clear enough to see. A teenage girl, maybe 16 or 17, with feathered hair and a wide, carefree smile. She stood in front of what looked like a fairground, lights blurred in the background. Someone, likely the driver, had scrawled a name in blue ink across the back, Maggie. Riley stared at the photo for a long moment. In that instant, the girl wasn't a skeleton in a car. She was alive, frozen forever in a moment of joy. Vega leaned closer. "You think she's one of the ones inside?" "Maybe," Riley said, slipping the photo into an evidence bag. "But until we know for sure, she's our first lead." The afternoon stretched on as evidence piled up. Scraps of clothing, rusted jewelry, even a broken cassette tape found wedged beneath the seat. Each item felt like a whisper from the past, begging to be heard. By dusk, the wreck was hauled out in pieces, the remains secured for transport. Deputies packed up, and the construction crew was released, though none of them seemed eager to return to work. The highway was quiet now, the tape fluttering in the evening breeze. Riley and Vega lingered. The air had shifted, heavy with the ghosts of a past no one had wanted uncovered. Route des Navy, Vega said, almost to himself. Wasn't there, I don't know, some kind of legend about this road? People disappearing back in the day. Riley gave him a sidelong look. Legends usually start with truth. Question is, how much of it survived? She tucked the evidence bag under her arm, the girl's smile staring back through the plastic. Maggie, who was she? Who had she been with? And who had buried them beneath this road like they were nothing? The answers lay somewhere in the forgotten files of 1984. But Riley already knew this. They had just stumbled across a single accident or a one-time killing. This was bigger, colder, darker. As they headed back toward their car, Vega asked the question that had been gnawing at both of them since the discovery. You think we're dealing with just one case here, or a string of them? Riley didn't hesitate. We'll find out soon enough. But as the headlights cut across the lonely highway, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, already knew they were digging up secrets meant to stay buried. And then, just as the night settled fully, a deputy ran up from the wreck site, breathless, waving an evidence bag. Detective Monroe, you need to see this now. Inside the bag was a keychain, encrusted with dirt, but the emblem was still visible. A small silver badge marked with the initials C.W. Riley's gut tightened. She didn't know the name yet, didn't know the power it would still hold in the present day, but she felt it like the faint rumble of thunder before a storm. The past wasn't done with Route 19. Not by a long shot. Chapter 2. The Vanished Years. The fluorescent hum of the Precinct's archive room always made Detective Riley Monroe feel like she was stepping back in time. The air was cool and stale, thick with the dust of decades-old paper. Towers of cardboard boxes leaned precariously against metal shelving, each one marked with fading labels and dates that stretched back into the 60s. It had been less than 12 hours since the Buick Regal had been pulled from beneath Route 19, and already Riley felt the case pressing in on her from every direction. That photo, the girl named Maggie, burned in her mind. Her smile had followed Riley into sleep and into the office that morning. Vega trailed behind her, juggling a stack of files in his arms. He had the enthusiasm of someone still green enough to believe answers could be found simply by digging hard enough. Riley didn't have the heart to tell him that sometimes the truth never surfaced at all. All right, Vega said, setting the files down on a table with a heavy thud. Missing persons from 82 to 86, all along the Route 19 corridor. Riley pulled on a pair of thin gloves and began flipping through the yellowed reports. Each page was a ghost, each face a question that had never been answered. Look at this, Vega said, spreading out several case photos. Linda Carter, 19, disappeared after a Friday night football game, 1983. Stephen Harris, 21, vanished while driving home from his job at the gas station, 1984. And here Janice and Paul Brody, both 20, vanished together after leaving a movie theater in 1985. Riley leaned closer, her brow furrowing. Couples, she murmured. Not just individuals. Couples going missing together. Vega nodded grimly. Which matches what we saw in the car. 2 skeletons, not one. The pattern was there, but it was faint, like threads barely visible in the weave of old fabric. Still, Riley had been a detective long enough to know when coincidence wasn't coincidence at all. She kept scanning until her hand froze over a report. Margaret, Maggie Doyle, age 16, disappeared in September 1984. Riley held up the photo stapled to the report. It was the same one she'd pulled from the glove compartment the day before. Maggie, with her carefree smile, standing in front of the fairground lights. She was last seen leaving the county fair. Riley read aloud. Witnesses say she got into a car with an older male. No license plate, no description strong enough to pursue. Vega's voice was quiet. So it's her. Maggie was in that car. Riley didn't answer right away. She kept scanning the report, noting the old officer's handwriting in the margins, the vague, hurried notes. Something about it all felt rushed, unfinished, like the investigation had been swept under the rug. She closed the file. We've got multiple missing persons, same area, same time frame. This wasn't random. Before Vega could respond, the creak of a door interrupted them. An older man in a worn suit stepped into the archive room. His hair was thin and white, his eyes sharp despite the weight of years. "Detective Monroe," he said, his voice gravelly. "Detective Vega." Riley recognized him immediately. Frank Delaney, retired detective. He'd been around during the 80s, working cases just like these. "Frank," Riley said, standing. "What brings you down here?" Delaney's gaze lingered on the open files, the spread of faces staring back at him. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, finally, "You're digging into the Route 19 cases." "That's right," Riley replied. "We found a car yesterday, buried under the highway, 2 bodies inside." Delaney's jaw tightened. "I figured it'd come back up someday." Vega frowned. "You knew about it." Delaney's eyes hardened. "We all knew, but some cases were meant to stay buried." Riley bristled at that. Meant by who? The old detective didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned heavily against the table, his weathered hands gripping the edge. "You've got no idea what you're stirring up, Monroe. Back then, every lead we touched died on the vine. Witnesses stopped talking. Evidence disappeared from lockers. We were told to drop it." "Told by who?" Vega pressed. Delaney's eyes flicked toward the ceiling, as though the walls still had ears. "By people with power. People you don't go after if you want to keep your badge." Silence filled the room. Riley's heart thudded in her chest. This wasn't just about old murders. This was about corruption. A system designed to let the guilty walk free. Delaney finally pushed away from the table, shaking his head. "If you're smart, you'll let sleeping dogs lie. Nothing good comes from chasing ghosts." And then he left, the door closing softly behind him, leaving the weight of his warning hanging in the stale air. Vega broke the silence. "Well, that was comforting." Riley exhaled slowly, her jaw set. "He's scared. That means he knows something. And if he knows something, we're on the right path." They gathered the files, carrying them out into the bright light of day. Hours later, as dusk fell, they drove out to the local cemetery, where some of the victims' families had laid symbolic graves, empty caskets, for bodies never recovered. The grass was long, dotted with old headstones, worn smooth by rain. Riley and Vega walked among the rows until they found the markers. Linda Carter, Janice, and Paul Brody, and a few others whose remains had never been found. Most of the graves were neglected, the flowers long dead, the soil sunken in, but one stood out. Fresh flowers, white lilies, their petals still damp with the morning's dew. Someone had been here recently. Riley crouched down, brushing her hand along the stems. These were left within the last day. Vega scanned the shadows stretching across the cemetery. So somebody's still visiting. After 40 years, Riley rose slowly, the hair on the back of her neck prickling. Whoever had left those flowers wasn't finished with the past. And odds were, they were watching, making sure the secrets of Route 19 stayed exactly where they belonged. Chapter 3. Ghosts Who Speak. The Doyle house sat at the edge of town, its white paint chipped and flaking, the porch sagging under the weight of time. A wind chime tinkled softly in the morning breeze, a sound too delicate for the heaviness that clung to the place. Detective Riley Monroe parked at the curb, staring for a moment at the curtains drawn across the windows. 40 years of silence lived inside that house, 40 years of questions with no answers. Maggie Doyle's name wasn't just ink on a file anymore. Wit was a face, a smile, a ghost Riley had carried with her since the day she opened that glove compartment. Beside her, Daniel Vega shut his notebook with a snap. "You think her parents are still around?" "Her mum," Riley said. "Her father passed in the 90s. Cancer." Vega exhaled slowly. "That's a long time to carry this kind of weight." They stepped out of the car and walked up the creaking steps. Riley knocked. After a long pause, the door opened. A woman in her 70s stood there, her hair a faded silver, her shoulders hunched but her eyes sharp as pins. "Mrs. Doyle," Riley asked gently, flashing her badge. "We're detectives. We'd like to talk to you about your daughter, Margaret." The old woman's face tightened. "Maggie." She said the name like it was glass that might shatter in her mouth. After a pause, she stepped aside. "Come in." The living room smelled faintly of lavender and mothballs. Photographs lined the mantel, most of them faded Polaroids. A young girl in braces, a teenager with feathered hair, a high school cheerleader, mid-jump. Maggie's presence was everywhere, frozen at 16. Mrs. Doyle eased into an armchair, her thin hands gripping the armrests. "I always knew she wasn't just a runaway," she said. "They told me she probably left on her own, that she'd turn up in a few weeks, but I knew my girl. Maggie was wild sometimes, sure, but she wasn't stupid. She wouldn't just vanish." Riley sat across from her. "We believe we found her car, ma'am, buried under Route 19. Mrs. Doyle's lips trembled, but she held herself steady. She'd waited too many years for this. "So it's true, she's gone." Riley hesitated. "We won't know for certain until the DNA confirms. But, yes, we believe she was inside that car." The woman nodded slowly, tears brimming in her eyes, but never falling. 40 years had dried the well of her grief. Vega leaned forward. "Mrs. Doyle, do you remember anything unusual about the night Maggie disappeared?" Her gaze drifted toward the mantel. "It was the county fair. She was supposed to come home with her friends, but she left with someone else. They said it was a man, older, drove a nice car, but nobody ever gave me a name. Nobody wanted to help." Riley's ears pricked. Did Maggie ever mention anyone? Someone older she was seeing? The old woman's hands clenched tighter around the chair. "There was talk, but whenever I pressed her, she'd shut me out. I think she was protecting him." "Protecting who?" Vega asked. Mrs. Doyle's eyes narrowed. "Someone people liked. Someone they wouldn't believe could do a thing like that. That's why the cops never tried. They wanted it buried." The room was quiet except for the ticking of a clock. Riley felt the weight of Delaney's warning again, echoing through the years. Before they left, Mrs. Doyle pressed a small box into Riley's hand. "Maggie's things," she said. "I never had the heart to throw them away. Maybe something in there will help you." Riley promised her they would do everything possible to bring answers. But as they stepped back into the daylight, she felt the gnawing certainty that the answers wouldn't come easy. Later that afternoon, they drove an hour north to meet David Carter, the brother of another missing teen, Linda Carter, the 19-year-old who vanished in 1983. David was in his 60s now, grizzled and bitter, living in a trailer park near the interstate. He answered the door shirtless, a cigarette dangling from his mouth. But when Riley introduced herself and mentioned Linda, the hardness in his eyes softened just a fraction. "She was my little sister," he said, ushering them inside. "And they didn't do a damn thing to find her." His trailer smelled of beer and old smoke, the shades drawn tight against the afternoon sun. David lit another cigarette, his hands shaking. "I told Em who did it. Told Em back then. They laughed in my face. Said I was drunk. Said I was just trying to stir up trouble." Riley leaned forward. "Who did you tell them?" David's jaw clenched. "Charles Whitmore." The name landed like a stone between them. Riley glanced at Vega, who scribbled it down instantly. "He was older than us. 20, maybe 21 back then. Came from money. Always hanging around the fairgrounds, around the high school games. Girls liked him 'cause he had money and a car. But he wasn't right. Had a temper. I saw him pick Maggie Doyle up one night, a few weeks before she went missing." Riley's pulse quickened. "And no one believed you?" David barked a humorless laugh. "Of course not. Whitmore's daddy owned half the county. He was untouchable. And now look at him, city councilman, smiling on TV like butter wouldn't melt in his damn mouth." Vega frowned. "If you don't mind me asking, why are you still so sure, after all these years?" David's eyes glistened. "Because I saw my sister get in his car the night she disappeared, and she never came back." The words hung heavy, thicker than smoke. Riley believed him not because of the bitterness in his tone, but because of the certainty in his eyes. As they were leaving, David called after them, "You dig deep enough, you'll find his dirt. Just pray you live long enough to prove it." That evening, Riley and Vega followed up on one of the older reports, a location mentioned by multiple witnesses, an abandoned hunting lodge just off Route 19, once owned by Whitmore's family. The sun was setting as they arrived, the trees casting long shadows over the crumbling building. The lodge loomed like a carcass, its windows shattered, its roof sagging. The air smelled of damp wood and mildew. "Hell of a place to bring a date," Vega muttered, flicking on his flashlight. They pushed through the rotted door. The floor groaned beneath their weight, and dust swirled in their beams of light. Empty beer cans and graffiti littered the place. Kids had clearly used it as a party spot over the years, but something about it felt wrong. The silence was too thick, too heavy. They moved through the ground floor, finding nothing but trash and old furniture. Then Vega froze, his light catching a staircase at the back. "Upstairs?" he asked. Riley nodded. Careful. Each step creaked as they ascended, the air growing colder. Riley's flashlight beam scanned across peeling wallpaper and broken doors. A long hallway stretched ahead, shadows pooled in every corner. Halfway down, a sudden sound made them both stop. Footsteps, soft, measured, coming from the far end of the hall. Vega's breath caught. "Tell me you heard that." Riley raised her gun. "I heard it." They crept forward, hearts pounding, the sound of footsteps growing louder, closer. Then, just as they reached the final door, the footsteps stopped. The hallway was silent again, except for their ragged breathing. Riley signaled to Vega. On three, they pushed the door open. The room was empty. Dust coated the floor, undisturbed. No footprints, no sign of anyone at all. And yet, the air was icy cold, as if someone had been standing there moments before. Riley's flashlight landed on something scrawled on the wall in faded red paint. Words, shaky and uneven, like they'd been carved in desperation. "You're next." Vega swallowed hard. "Riley, what the hell is this?" Before she could answer, a loud crash echoed from downstairs. Someone or something was in the lodge with them. Chapter 4. A pattern in blood. The crash downstairs rattled the floorboards beneath Riley Monroe's boots. She and Vega froze, listening. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the faint drip of water somewhere in the decaying lodge. Riley raised her weapon, signaling Vega to follow. Step by step, they crept back down the staircase, beams of their flashlights cutting through the gloom. At the base of the stairs, the air felt heavier, damp with the smell of rot. Something had shifted, she could feel it in her bones. They swept the main room, but nothing stirred. Then Vega's light caught the source of the crash. An old cabinet had toppled over, its wood splintered across the floor. "No footprints," Riley whispered, scanning the dust. "No sign anyone touched it." Vega let out a shaky breath. "So what? The place just falls apart on its own." Riley didn't answer. Her instinct screamed at her that someone had been there watching them, maybe even following them. But whoever it was had vanished as quickly as they'd come. They left the lodge uneasy, the night pressing close around them. The next morning, back at the precinct, the forensics report on the car arrived. Riley spread the papers across her desk, while Vega leaned over her shoulder. 2 sets of remains, Riley read aloud, both mid to late teens. One female confirmed as Margaret Doyle, the second male, approximately 17 to 19, still waiting on DNA. Vega frowned. So Maggie wasn't alone that night. Riley tapped the page. Neither were Linda Carter, Janice, and Paul Brody, or the others. They all disappeared in pairs. Couples. Vega's notebook was already open, his pen flying across the page. That's a signature, a pattern. Whoever did this was targeting young couples. Riley nodded slowly. Not random, controlled. Someone who wanted to destroy, not just individuals, but bonds, relationships. Her eyes drifted to the photo of Maggie she'd pulled from the glove compartment. That smile, frozen in time. Whoever had been with her that night hadn't just vanished. He'd been buried alongside her. Vega leaned back. This isn't one murder, it's a series. 4, maybe 5 cases. All along Route 19, all in the same window of time. Riley's pulse quickened. She could feel the edges of something bigger forming, the skeleton of a truth that had been buried for decades. By noon, Riley and Vega were holed up in the records room again, poring over brittle case files and yellowed newspaper clippings. One headline from 1985 screamed out in faded ink. Another pair missing on Route 19. Police baffled. The article quoted frightened parents, rumors of a Route 19 killer, and assurances from officials that all leads are being pursued. But the trail had gone cold, and the story had faded from the front page long before anyone was found. "What do you think?" Vega asked, sliding the clipping across the table. "One person, or more than one?" Riley studied the words. Could be one, could be a group. But either way, someone wanted this forgotten. Vega frowned, and they nearly got away with it. If that construction crew hadn't dug up the Buick, they'd still be under there. Riley finished. That evening, Riley sat alone in her apartment, files spread across her kitchen table. She was still awake when her phone buzzed. The text came from an unlisted number. "You're digging where you shouldn't. Stop, or you'll join them." Riley's stomach dropped. Her first instinct was to call Vega, but she stopped herself. If someone was watching, if someone knew she was alone, she couldn't show fear. Instead, she saved the message, tracing every word with her eyes. Whoever sent it wasn't bluffing. They knew about the case, knew she was digging, and they wanted her to stop. The next morning, Riley showed the text to Vega. His face darkened. "This isn't just some crank. This is someone who knows what happened, and they know we're close." Riley nodded. "We've got to tread carefully. If they've kept this buried for 40 years, they won't hesitate to do it again." Vega tapped his notebook. "Then we push harder. We dig until there's nothing left to bury." Their digging led them to another name, a survivor. Back in 1985, a young woman named Carla James had reported an attempted abduction on Route 19. She'd been walking home from a party when a car pulled up beside her. The driver had tried to lure her inside. She escaped, but her description was vague, and police at the time dismissed her as drunk and hysterical. Now, 40 years later, Carla was a middle-aged woman living in a modest ranch house outside the city. Riley and Vega sat with her in the living room, the hum of an old ceiling fan spinning above them. Carla lit a cigarette, her hands trembling slightly. "I tried to tell them," she said, her voice rough. "Tried to tell everyone, but they didn't care. Said I imagined it." "Can you tell us again?" Riley asked gently. Carla took a drag, exhaled slowly. "It was late. I was walking along Route 19. This car pulls up. Nice car, real shiny. The guy driving, he was older, maybe early 20s, handsome, in a clean-cut kind of way. But his eyes," she shivered, "cold, like looking at glass." Riley leaned forward. "Did you recognize him?" Carla hesitated, biting her lip. Then she nodded. "I saw him on the news a few months ago, smiling, shaking hands, talking about fixing the city. I'll never forget that face." Vega's pen stopped mid-stroke. "Who was it?" Carla stubbed out her cigarette with a shaking hand. "Councilman Charles Whitmore." The room was silent, the weight of the name pressing down on all three of them. Riley felt her chest tighten. There it was, the first real thread tying the powerful councilman to the forgotten dead of Route 19. "Can you swear to that?" Vega asked carefully. Carla's eyes were fierce. "I'd swear it on my mother's grave. He's the one. I know it." On the drive back, Vega was buzzing with energy. "We've got him, Riley, an eyewitness, a survivor. This is enough to bring him in." But Riley shook her head. "No, it's 40 years old, Vega. Her word against his. Without hard evidence, we don't stand a chance. So what do we do?" Riley's gaze hardened. "We keep digging. There's more out there. There has to be." Back at the precinct, Riley returned to the box Mrs. Doyle had given her. Inside were Maggie's belongings, a few pieces of jewelry, some old letters, a diary with several pages torn out. As she flipped through it, something caught her eye. A half-page entry written in a teenager's looping scrawl. "He says he'll take me to the lodge after the fair. Says it's our secret. I know Mom wouldn't approve, but he's older. He knows things. I think I'm falling for him." The entry wasn't dated, but Riley didn't need a date. The lodge, the fair. Maggie had been writing about him. And then she saw the last line, underlined twice. "CW makes me feel alive." Riley's throat went dry. She didn't need a forensics team to know what those initials meant. Charles Whitmore. That night, as Riley drove home, she couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. The headlights behind her stayed too close for too long. She pulled into a gas station suddenly, watching as the car behind her sped past without stopping. She didn't get the license plate, but the message was clear. She was being watched. Hours later, when she finally returned to her apartment, Riley found a plain envelope taped to her door. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. It showed her and Vega standing outside the Doyle house earlier that week, and scrawled across the bottom, in thick black marker, were 3 words: "Stop, last warning." Riley's hand trembled as she held the photo. The past wasn't just resurfacing, it was reaching into the present, clawing at anyone who dared to expose it. Chapter 5: The Untouchable Man. Councilman Charles Whitmore stood at the podium, his smile wide, his handshake firm, his voice carrying through the city council chamber with the polish of a man who had practiced every gesture in the mirror. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes, and constituents clapped politely as he spoke of progress, of revitalization, of making the city a safer, brighter place for our children. Detective Riley Monroe sat in the back row, her arms folded, her expression hard. She watched him like a hawk studying prey, though the rest of the room seemed entranced. His suit was sharp, his hair perfectly combed, his demeanor calm and commanding. To the public, he was a man to admire. But Riley had Maggie Doyle's diary entry burned into her mind. CW makes me feel alive. Charles Whitmore wasn't just a politician. He was the shadow that had haunted Route 19 for decades. When the meeting ended, the crowd swarmed Whitmore. He shook hands, posed for photos, and offered sound bites to reporters. His smile never faltered. Riley and Vega waited by the exit. When Whitmore finally moved toward the doors, Vega stepped forward. "Councilman Whitmore." Whitmore turned, his eyes sweeping over them. For the briefest moment, Riley saw something flicker there, sharp, cold recognition. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by practiced charm. "Yes," he said smoothly. "Can I help you?" Riley flashed her badge. "Detectives Monroe and Vega. We'd like to ask you a few questions, privately." Whitmore's smile didn't falter. "Of course, though I must warn you, my time is limited. City business, you understand." They moved into a quiet hallway. Whitmore clasped his hands in front of him, posture relaxed, though his eyes never left Riley's. "This is about the discovery on Route 19, isn't it?" he asked. Riley studied him carefully. 2 bodies were found in a car buried under the highway. One of them was Margaret Doyle. "Did you know her?" Whitmore's expression was perfectly measured. A flicker of sympathy crossed his face. "Yes, I knew Maggie. Everyone knew Maggie. She was a sweet girl." Bright smile. "It was tragic when she disappeared. Her diary suggests she was seeing someone older," Riley pressed. "Someone who promised to take her to your family's hunting lodge." Whitmore's smile dimmed just slightly. "Detective, that lodge has been abandoned for decades. Teenagers used it all the time. I can't be responsible for who Maggie may have been involved with." Vega leaned in. "Carla James says you tried to abduct her in 1985. She identified you." For the first time, Whitmore's eyes hardened. Just a flash, sharp as broken glass. Then he chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Carla James. I remember her. She accused half the men in this county at one point or another. I was cleared then, and I'll be cleared now. If she's dredging up false memories 40 years later, well, that's a shame." Riley's jaw tightened. He was slippery, practiced, every answer rehearsed. Whitmore leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I'll give you some advice. Detectives, there are cases you can solve, and cases you can't. This is one you can't. The families want closure, not scandal. If you keep poking at old wounds, you'll only hurt them more." The words weren't advice, they were a warning. Whitmore gave them one last smile before walking away, his entourage sweeping him out the door and into the waiting cameras. Back in the precinct, Vega paced the length of their office. "He's guilty," he said flatly. "You saw the way he looked at us. He knows. He's daring us to prove it." Riley rubbed her temples. "But all we've got is a survivor's word and a diary entry. That's not enough." Vega slammed his notebook shut. "Then we get more. We dig until we find something that sticks." Before Riley could respond, a uniformed officer appeared at the door, holding an envelope. "This came for you." Riley opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper with block letters cut from newspapers. "Drop IT or die." Vega's face darkened. "He's escalating." Riley folded the letter. "Or someone working for him is either way. We're getting too close for comfort." That night, Riley left the precinct well after dark. Her car was parked in the dimly lit lot, the rows nearly empty. As she approached, her stomach tightened. Her front tires were slashed, the rubber was shredded, the car listing forward like a wounded animal, and tucked under her windshield wiper was another note. "Last warning." Riley scanned the shadows, every instinct screaming that someone was watching. But the lot was empty, the silence suffocating. The next morning, she met Vega at a diner just outside town. The clatter of dishes and murmur of voices offered a thin veneer of normalcy. But both detectives sat with their shoulders tense, eyes darting toward every stranger who walked in. "We're dealing with someone who has resources," Riley said quietly. "Money, connections. Enough to keep this buried for 40 years. Vega stirred his coffee, his hand shaking slightly. "He's got people in his pocket, maybe even in the department. That's how Delaney's cases died back then. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses shut up." Riley nodded. "If we go after him directly, we'll lose. We need something undeniable, something he can't talk his way out of." Vega leaned forward. "Then we go back to the lodge. There has to be something there. If he used it as a hunting ground, maybe he left evidence behind." They returned that evening, armed with crime scene techs and ground-penetrating radar. The old lodge loomed against the twilight sky, its broken windows like blackened eyes. The team swept the ground around the building, scanning beneath the soil. Hours passed before the machine beeped, signaling anomalies underground. The tech called Riley over. "We're getting hits, multiple, about 6 feet down." Riley's chest tightened. By these, could be. The team began digging. Dirt gave way to something else, fragments of fabric, then bone. By midnight, they had uncovered a shallow grave containing the remains of 2 more victims, a boy and a girl, still holding each other in death. Vega's face was pale. "Jesus, how many are there?" Riley whispered. "As many as he wanted." The tech brushed dirt from a bracelet on the girl's wrist. A name was etched into the metal. Janice Brody. Vega swallowed hard. "That's another missing pair confirmed." Riley stared at the skeletons, her stomach twisting. This wasn't just murder, it was ritual. A pattern of cruelty played out over years, hidden beneath the earth. And someone had kept it hidden. By the time they returned to the precinct, the evidence locker was filling with bones, artifacts, fragments of lives stolen. The case file thickened by the hour, but so did the danger. The next morning, Riley arrived to find her desk drawer open. Inside was a Polaroid photograph of her sleeping in her apartment, taken through the window. The message scrawled at the bottom, "Next time, we won't just watch." Her blood ran cold. Whoever was protecting Whitmore wasn't bluffing anymore. Chapter 6: Cracks in the Mask. The ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel glittered with chandeliers and laughter. Silk gowns swept across polished marble floors, champagne glasses clinked, and the city's elite moved from circle to circle, like actors on a stage. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their notes drowned beneath the hum of conversation. Councilman Charles Whitmore was the center of it all, his smile dazzling, his handshake warm, his presence magnetic. He was hosting a charity gala for children's hospitals, the kind of event that earned him front-page praise and campaign donations in equal measure. Detective Riley Monroe stood near the back, a borrowed cocktail dress stiff on her shoulders, her hair swept back. She looked like she belonged at least enough not to draw attention, but her eyes never left Whitmore. Beside her, Daniel Vega tugged at his tie like it was strangling him. "I feel like I'm undercover at a mob wedding," he muttered. "That's not far off," Riley replied. They weren't here for the champagne or the orchestra. They were here to watch him, to see how the man behind the mask behaved when he thought the world adored him. Whitmore laughed easily as he posed for photos, his arm draped around donors and council colleagues. His voice carried across the room, smooth as silk. He looked untouchable. But Riley had read Maggie Doyle's diary. She had stood over the shallow graves at the lodge. She had seen the Polaroid left on her desk, and she knew that behind the polished smile was a predator. As the night went on, Riley noticed small cracks, the way Whitmore's eyes lingered on younger women a beat too long, the flash of irritation when a server spilled champagne near his shoes, the way he gripped a supporter's shoulder just a bit too hard, a subtle dominance masked as friendliness. Vega leaned close. "He's good, I'll give him that." "Too good," Riley murmured. Later, as the gala wound down, Riley slipped away from the crowd and found herself near a hallway leading to the hotel's staff areas. She wasn't sure what drew her there, instinct, maybe, but the air shifted as she stepped into the shadows. And then she heard it, Whitmore's voice, low, sharp, nothing like the warm politician's tone he used in public. "You think you can just show up and remind me of the past?" he snapped. Riley pressed against the wall, listening. Another voice answered, shaky and nervous. I just wanted to talk, Charles. I never told anyone, I swear." Whitmore's reply was ice. "Then keep it that way, because if you open your mouth, I'll bury you the same way I buried the others." Riley's chest tightened. She strained to hear more, but footsteps approached. She ducked into a side room as Whitmore stormed past, his face twisted in a mask of fury before smoothing back into a smile as he rejoined the crowd. Whoever he had been speaking to was gone. The next morning, Riley and Vega drove back to the old lodge. Forensics had left markers across the property, bright flags fluttering against the earth. More graves had been uncovered, more young lives stolen. But it wasn't just the victims haunting Riley's mind. It was Whitmore's voice, cold and clear, threatening someone into silence. Inside the lodge, Riley searched room by room, her flashlight beam cutting through dust and shadow. In the basement, a space she hadn't noticed before, she found a trap door beneath a rotted rug. With Vega's help, She pried it open. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. The air was stale, tinged with the coppery scent of old blood. They stepped carefully, their lights revealing a hidden room. The walls were concrete, the floor stained, rusted chains hung from the ceiling, their metal corroded with time. Vega's breath caught. Jesus, this was a dungeon. On a broken table lay scraps of fabric, brittle with age. Faded initials stitched into one piece. Elsie Riley whispered, Linda Carter. The basement was a tomb, a place where Whitmore had fed his cruelty before burying it beneath years of charm and power. Riley's stomach twisted. The councilman had stood in front of cameras and smiled, while beneath his family's lodge, this horror had festered. Back at the precinct, Riley laid the evidence out for Captain Mills. Photographs of the basement, the graves, the diary entry, Carla James's testimony. Mills rubbed his face, weary. It's compelling, but it's circumstantial. 40 years old, chain of custody issues, no living witnesses beyond Carla James. Riley slammed her hand on the desk. We can't just let him keep walking free. Mills's eyes hardened. Be careful, Riley. Whitmore isn't just a councilman. He's connected. He's got friends in high places, and if you push too hard, you'll find yourself off this case or worse. The warning rang too close to Delaney's words. Some cases were meant to stay buried, but Riley wasn't ready to bury anything. That night, she sat in her apartment, files spread across the table, exhaustion pressing at her. She couldn't stop replaying Whitmore's voice from the gala. I'll bury you the same way I buried the others. Who had he been talking to? Her phone buzzed. A text, from an unknown number again. You think you're safe? Look outside. Riley froze. Slowly, she rose and pulled back the curtain. Across the street, a black sedan idled with its headlights off. She grabbed her phone, ready to call Vega, but before she could dial, the car pulled away, disappearing into the night. Her phone buzzed again. We're always watching. The next morning, Riley and Vega regrouped at the precinct. Both looked haggard, shadows under their eyes. Vega rubbed his temples. He's got people following you. Probably me too. We can't keep this quiet much longer. Riley nodded. Then we force it into the open. We find a way to corner him where he can't slip away. He's careful, but no one's perfect. They brainstormed possibilities: financial records, old friends, ex-girlfriends, people who might have seen behind Whitmore's mask. By afternoon, they had a short list of names, women who had dated Whitmore in the 80s, a few co-workers from his father's company. They started making calls. Most brushed them off. Some hung up, but a few agreed to meet quietly, privately. One, a woman named Allison Shaw, had dated Whitmore briefly in 1983. She described him as charming at first, then controlling, jealous, with a temper that flared in terrifying bursts. He scared me, she admitted, her hands shaking as she lit a cigarette. He once said, if I ever embarrassed him, he'd make sure no one ever found me. The words echoed like a whisper from the graves. But for every lead they found, Whitmore seemed to tighten his grip. That evening, the detectives attended another city event, blending with the crowd as Whitmore took the stage again. His speech was flawless, his applause thunderous. To everyone else, he was the savior of the city. To Riley and Vega, he was a predator cloaked in respectability. And as the applause swelled, Whitmore's gaze drifted toward them at the back of the room. His smile widened, not warm, but sharp, knowing, like a hunter spotting prey. Later that night, Riley returned to her apartment. Exhausted, she dropped her keys on the counter and went to lock the door. But it was already unlocked. Her stomach dropped. Slowly, she pushed the door open wider. The living room was dark, but she could feel that someone had been there, maybe still was. She reached for her gun, heart pounding, and then a voice drifted from the shadows, calm and familiar. Detective Monroe. Charles Whitmore stepped forward, perfectly dressed, perfectly calm, as though he belonged in her living room. You and I need to have a little chat, he said, his smile raised. Chapter 7. The Trap. Riley Monroe's finger hovered just above the trigger of her Glock, her heart hammering against her ribs. Riley. Charles Whitmore stood in the middle of her living room, perfectly composed, his tailored suit unwrinkled, his smile polished as if he'd just stepped off a stage. Relax, detective, he said smoothly, raising his hands slightly as though mocking surrender. If I meant you harm, you wouldn't have made it through the door. Riley's grip tightened. You broke into my home. Whitmore tilted his head, unbothered. I prefer to think of it as a private audience. After all, You've been chasing me rather aggressively. I thought it only fair to give you the courtesy of a conversation." The arrogance in his tone made Riley's skin crawl. She kept her weapon trained on him. "Say what you came to say." Whitmore took a slow step forward. "You're good, detective. Persistent. Smarter than the ones who came before you. I'll give you that. But persistence has a price. And if you keep digging into things better left buried, that price will be your career. And maybe your life." Riley's jaw tightened. "You think you scare me?" His smile widened, shark-like. "I don't think I know. Because you're smart enough to understand what I am capable of. You've seen it in the graves. You've smelled it in that basement." The room felt colder. Whitmore's presence was suffocating, like a predator toying with prey. "You killed them," Riley said evenly. "Maggie Doyle, Linda Carter, the Brodys. How many more?" Whitmore, his eyes glittered, almost amused. "Does it matter? They're forgotten. I gave them more meaning in death than they ever would have had in life." Rage surged in Riley's chest. She wanted to pull the trigger, but she needed him alive. She needed proof. Before she could speak again, the door burst open. Riley, Daniel Vega charged in, his weapon raised. For a fraction of a second, Whitmore's mask slipped. His smile flattened, his eyes hardened. "Ah," Whitmore said, his tone suddenly colder. "The loyal partner." Vega stepped forward, fury etched on his face. "You need to leave, now, or I swear." Whitmore chuckled, cutting him off. "Or you'll what? Arrest me. You don't have the evidence, and even if you did, it wouldn't stick. Men like me don't go to prison. Detective Vega, we build them." Riley's pulse pounded. She wanted to scream at Vega to hold steady, but Whitmore was already moving, brushing past them toward the door. "Consider this a warning," he said over his shoulder. "Keep chasing me, and you'll regret it." The door clicked shut behind him. The apartment was silent, except for Riley's ragged breathing. Vega lowered his weapon. "You okay?" Riley nodded stiffly. "He's taunting us. He thinks we can't touch him." Vega's jaw clenched. "Then we prove him wrong." The following days blurred into a frenzy of digging. Riley and Vega worked around the clock, interviewing anyone who had crossed paths with Whitmore in the 80s. An old classmate recalled his charm, his perfect grades, his ability to talk teachers out of trouble. A former girlfriend described sudden rages, jealous accusations, bruises she never admitted were his fault. A bartender remembered him frequenting the lodge with different girls, always flashing cash. Piece by piece, a darker portrait of Whitmore emerged. But the problem was always the same. No evidence that tied him directly to the graves. No smoking gun. Meanwhile, Whitmore struck back. One morning, Riley walked into the precinct to find internal affairs waiting. Her desk was stripped bare, her files gone. The lead investigator handed her a notice. "Detective Monroe, you're under review. Anonymous allegations claim you've been tampering with evidence in the Route 19 case." Riley's stomach dropped. "That's a lie." The investigator's tone was flat. "Be that as it may, you're suspended pending review." Vega's face flushed red with anger. "This is Whitmore. He's pulling strings." But Riley barely heard him. She felt the walls closing in. Whitmore wasn't just fighting back, he was dismantling her career piece by piece. That night, Vega showed up at her apartment with 2 coffees and a fire in his eyes. "They can sideline you, Riley," he said, setting the cups down. "But they can't sideline me. And I'm not stopping until we bury Whitmore once and for all." Riley gave a weary smile. "You sound like me." Vega leaned forward. "We need to set a trap. Make him think he's safe. Force him to make a mistake." Riley hesitated. "He's too careful. Everyone slips." Vega insisted. "We just have to be ready when he does." 2 nights later, they put the plan in motion. They arranged a sting at the lodge, planting a hidden camera system in the basement and leaving word through carefully placed channels that evidence was being stored there temporarily. If Whitmore was watching, if he had ears inside the department, he'd hear it, and he wouldn't be able to resist cleaning up loose ends. Riley and Vega waited in an unmarked van half a mile away, eyes fixed on the monitor. The lodge sat in eerie silence, moonlight spilling across its rotted frame. Hours passed. Nothing. Vega shifted restlessly. "Maybe he didn't take the bait. Or maybe he's waiting," Riley said, eyes locked on the screen. Just after 2 a.m., headlights appeared on the monitor. A sleek black sedan rolled up the dirt road. Vega's pulse jumped. "That's him." A figure stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered. Even in the grainy night vision, the posture was unmistakable. Charles Whitmore. He moved toward the lodge with calm precision, as though he owned the night itself. He carried something in his hand, a canister. Gasoline. Vega's jaw tightened. He's going to burn it. Destroy the evidence. Riley grabbed her radio. Move in now. But before backup could respond, the monitor flickered. Static. The feed cut out. Shit, Vega shouted, slamming the console. He killed the signal. Riley grabbed her weapon. We go in. They sped down the dirt road, gravel spraying beneath the tires. The lodge loomed ahead, its broken windows glowing faintly with firelight. Whitmore was inside. Riley and Vega pushed through the door, weapons raised. Smoke filled the air, flames licking the walls. Whitmore, Riley shouted. From the shadows, his voice came back, calm and mocking. You never learn, detective. The fire crackled, spreading faster. The heat was suffocating. And then Riley realized with horror there was another figure in the room. A young man, bound to a chair, gagged, his eyes wide with terror. Whitmore's trap wasn't just for evidence, it was for them. The councilman's silhouette moved toward the back exit, slipping into the smoke. Catch me if you can, he taunted, before vanishing into the night. Riley and Vega rushed to the bound man, dragging him free as the flames roared higher. By the time they stumbled out into the cold night air, coughing and covered in soot, the lodge was an inferno. The graves, the basement, the chains, everything was burning, and Whitmore was gone. Chapter 8. Confronting the Devil. The fire at the lodge raged through the night, flames devouring the rotted wood, smoke curling into the black sky like a funeral shroud. By the time the fire department doused the last embers, the basement was ash, the graves disturbed, the evidence gone. Detective Riley Monroe stood behind the caution tape, her throat raw from smoke, her fists clenched so tight her nails dug crescents into her palms. Beside her, Daniel Vega sat on the back of an ambulance, an oxygen mask dangling around his neck. The rescued young man, barely 20, pale and trembling, was being loaded into another ambulance. They hadn't gotten his name yet, but he was alive. He was proof Whitmore wasn't finished. Riley watched the lodge collapse inward, sparks popping in the air. Whitmore had erased decades of horror in one night, but he'd slipped. He'd revealed himself. He wasn't just a ghost of the past, he was still hunting, still feeding whatever darkness had lived in him since the 80s. And Riley knew one thing. She would drag him into the light, if it was the last thing she did. The next morning, the precinct buzzed with chaos. Reporters swarmed the building, demanding answers about the mystery fire at the old Whitmore Lodge. The department released a bland statement about an unoccupied structure fire under investigation. Inside, Captain Mills pulled Riley and Vega into his office. His face was red, his eyes bloodshot. What the hell were you two doing out there? Riley slammed the door behind her. We pulled a kid out of that building alive. Whitmore put him there. He set the fire. Mills leaned across his desk. Do you have proof? Riley's voice cracked. I saw him, Captain. Mills dropped his voice, sharp and cold. Then why don't I see his name in your report? Why don't I see him in cuffs right now? Riley opened her mouth, but Mills cut her off. Because you don't have squat. You've got suspicion and smoke. And suspicion doesn't hold up in court. Meanwhile, Whitmore's on the news right now, talking about how devastated he is that his family property burned down. He's already spinning it. And you're making this department look like fools. Riley's blood boiled. You know damn well he's guilty. Mills' eyes hardened. And you know damn well he's untouchable. You keep pushing like this, and he'll bury you before you bury him. The words stung, because she'd heard them before Delaney, Carla James, David Carter. Everyone who had tried to expose Whitmore had been silenced, but Riley wasn't ready to fold. Not now. That night, her apartment felt colder than usual, shadows stretching long across the floor. She kept her gun close, her nerves frayed. Every sound outside made her pulse jump. Near midnight, a soft knock echoed at her door. Her grip tightened on the Glock as she moved to the peephole. Charles Whitmore stood in the hallway, alone, calm, like he had been invited. Riley yanked the door open, weapon raised. You've got some nerve. Whitmore didn't flinch. He stepped inside before she could stop him, his cologne mixing with a faint scent of smoke, still clinging to her clothes. Relax, he said smoothly. I'm not here to hurt you. Not yet. Riley's stomach turned. You set that fire. You put that boy in there. Whitmore chuckled softly, loosening his cufflinks, as if he owned the place. Detective, I don't have to do anything. People do it for me. Some out of fear, some out of loyalty. That's power. That's what you'll never understand. Riley kept her weapon steady. Why are you here? His eyes glittered. Because I want you to stop. I'm offering you a chance to walk away. You're young, talented. You could have a long career if you play it smart. But keep coming after me. His smile sharpened. And you'll end up like Maggie Doyle, like the rest of them. Riley's voice was ice. You're admitting it. Whitmore leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. I'm not admitting anything. I'm reminding you who I am. And reminding you that no one will ever believe you. She wanted to pull the trigger right there. End it. But she froze, her finger trembling. He was right about one thing without evidence. It was her word against his. Whitmore straightened, adjusting his jacket. You're not the first to try. You won't be the last. But I'll still be standing when you're gone. And then he placed something on her kitchen counter. A knife. Old, blood-stained. The blade dulled with age. Souvenir, he said, his smile chilling. You'll find it has your prints on it now. Think carefully about how you use your time, detective. Her heart stopped. You set me up. Whitmore's eyes gleamed. Always 3 steps ahead. He walked to the door, his presence as suffocating leaving as it was arriving. Before he slipped out, he glanced back. I'll see you at the funeral. Maybe yours, maybe your partner's. Who knows? The door clicked shut, leaving Riley standing in silence, the knife gleaming in the dim light. Minutes later, Vega burst into the apartment after her frantic call. His eyes went wide at the knife, sealed in an evidence bag on her counter. He left this? Vega asked. Riley nodded, her hands shaking. He's framing me. It's my prince. He wants me out of the picture. Vega's face darkened. Then we flip it. We make this the thing that brings him down. We just need to prove chain of custody. Catch him planting it. Riley shook her head. He's too smart, too careful. By the time we're done arguing, he'll have me suspended for murder. Vega's jaw tightened. Then we go rogue. Off the books. No reports, no chain of command. Just us. Riley hesitated, the weight of a badge heavy in her chest. If they went down this road, there was no going back. But Whitmore had already crossed the line, and she was done playing by his rules. The next morning, Riley was called into internal affairs. The investigator slid the knife across the table in a fresh evidence bag. Your fingerprints are all over it, he said flatly. The blood matches a victim from 1985. Care to explain? Riley stared him down. It was planted. The investigator raised an eyebrow. By who? She opened her mouth, but no words came. Whitmore's face flashed in her mind, his smile, his voice. No one will ever believe you. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. You're suspended, the investigator said coldly, effective immediately. That night, Riley sat in her darkened apartment, stripped of her badge, her weapon locked away in IA's custody. She felt hollow, like a ghost herself. Then her phone buzzed, a text from Vega. Got a witness. Says he saw Whitmore driving the Buick in '84. Meet me at the safe house. Riley's heart leaped. Finally, a real witness. A chance to turn the tide. She grabbed her coat and rushed out into the night. The safe house was a small cabin on the outskirts of town, secluded and dark. Vega's car was parked out front. Riley hurried up the steps, heart pounding. She knocked once, twice. From inside came the muffled sound of movement. Then gunshots. 3 sharp cracks shattered the night, echoing through the trees. Riley froze on the porch, her blood running cold. Chapter 9. The Breaking Point. The gunshots shattered the quiet night like glass. Riley Monroe's instincts screamed, and she dove off the porch, rolling behind the cabin's wooden railing. Her heart pounded, every muscle taut. Vega, she shouted, her voice echoing through the trees. Silence, then a muffled groan from inside. Riley sprang up, weapon raised, and kicked the door open. The hinges cracked, the door slamming against the wall. The cabin's interior was dim, lit only by a single lamp. The air reeked of gunpowder. Daniel Vega lay sprawled on the floor, blood seeping from his shoulder, his face pale with shock. Riley, he gasped. She dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against the wound. Stay with me. Where's the shooter? Vega grimaced, nodding toward the back door. Gone. Fast. They knew where we'd be. Knew we had the witness. Riley's stomach twisted. The witness, where is he? Vega's face tightened with pain. Dead. They shot him first. Riley felt the air leave her lungs. Their one chance gone in seconds. Paramedics arrived minutes later, whisking Vega onto a stretcher. Riley stayed by his side until the ambulance door slammed shut, sirens wailing into the night. She stood alone outside the cabin, her clothes spattered with her partner's blood. The safe house had been compromised. Whitmore knew their every move. Her phone buzzed. A text. "You can't protect anyone, not even him." Riley's hand shook as she gripped the phone. Whitmore was tightening the noose, and now he was playing directly with her sanity. The next morning, Internal Affairs doubled down. The investigator confronted Riley in the precinct lobby, his voice loud enough for others to hear. "You were at the safe house when shots were fired. One man dead, one detective wounded, and you're suspended. What were you even doing there, Monroe?" Riley's voice was low, dangerous, trying to save lives. "Something Whitmore's been taking for 40 years. The investigator's eyes narrowed. "Careful. If you keep saying his name without evidence, you'll find yourself facing slander charges." Riley stared him down, her blood boiling. "Maybe that's what he wants, but I'm not giving him the satisfaction." Vega survived surgery. Riley sat at his hospital bedside, his skin pale, his breathing shallow. He managed a faint smile when he saw her. "You look worse than me," he whispered. "Don't joke," Riley said softly, gripping his hand. "You almost died." He shook his head weakly. "Not yet. I'm not leaving you alone with this bastard." Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him to rest, to step back, to let her take it from here. But she knew Vega wouldn't stop, not after what Whitmore had done. While Vega recovered, Riley dug alone. She poured through old microfilm, property records, campaign finance reports. She found threads Whitmore's father donating to local officials in the 80s, evidence that files had disappeared during his tenure. Money had greased the silence for decades. Late one night, as she scrolled through scanned newspapers, something caught her eye. A photo from 1984, the county fair, bright lights, smiling teenagers, and in the background barely visible Charles Whitmore, leaning against a car, the Buick Regal. Her heart slammed. It wasn't proof, not enough for court, but it was something, a crack in his mask. 2 days later, Vega was discharged with his arm in a sling. He looked weak, but his fire was still there. "Found something?" he asked, sliding into her apartment with a grimace. Riley showed him the photo. "Look, same night Maggie disappeared. That's him. That's the Buick." Vega's eyes lit up. "We get this enhanced. It could be admissible. Even if it doesn't nail him, it puts him at the scene." Riley nodded. "But it won't be enough. Not alone. We need a living witness." Vega's voice was hoarse. "And we just lost the one we had." Silence pressed in, heavy as stone. That night, Riley couldn't sleep. She tossed in bed, Whitmore's face haunting her. His calm voice, his threats, the way he had stood in her living room like he owned it. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a threat. It was a video. She sat up, heart hammering, and pressed play. The screen showed her, sleeping in her bed, the camera angle from her own bedroom doorway. The video ended abruptly after 5 seconds. Riley's stomach churned. He'd been in her home again, watching her. The next day, Riley stormed into Captain Mill's office. "He's breaking into my apartment, leaving threats, planting evidence. How long are you going to let him do this?" Mills rubbed his temples. "You're suspended, Monroe. You shouldn't even be here." Riley leaned across his desk, her eyes blazing. "If you won't stop him, I will." Mill's voice was low. "Do you want to end up like Delaney, retired in disgrace, or worse?" Riley froze. You knew this was buried." Mills didn't answer. He just looked away. And in that silence, Riley knew. Whitmore had people in the department. He always had. By evening, Riley and Vega met in secret at a diner off the highway. The place smelled of coffee and fried onions, the neon sign buzzing faintly. Vega's voice was low. "We can't trust anyone. Not Mills, not IA. It's just us now." Riley nodded grimly. "Then we played dirty. We set our own trap. How? We make him think we've got the final nail in the coffin, something he can't afford to let stand. We lure him out, make him show his hand." Vega leaned back, wincing from his shoulder wound. "That's dangerous." Riley's eyes were cold. So was doing nothing. That night, Riley left the diner and drove home through the dark, empty streets. Her headlights cut across the familiar stretch of Route 19, the same road where Maggie Doyle's Buick had been buried, where the Brodies had vanished, where Whitmore's shadow had loomed for decades. Her phone buzzed again. Another text. "Route 19 is where it ends. Meet me there, alone." Her grip tightened on the wheel. It was reckless, a trap, maybe even suicide. But she knew she had no choice. If she didn't go, he'd keep coming. For her, for Vega, for anyone who got in his way. She pulled the car over to the shoulder, the night pressing in around her, the road eerily silent. And then she saw them. Headlights, a black sedan pulling up behind her. Her phone buzzed once more. Time to bury the past. Chapter 10. The Last Burial. The night was black and endless, Route 19 stretching out like a scar through the countryside. The air was thick, heavy with the weight of 40 years of secrets. Detective Riley Monroe gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles went white. In her rearview mirror, the black sedan idled, headlights burning into her eyes. Her phone buzzed again. Step out. Alone. Riley's pulse thundered in her ears. She slid her Glock from its holster, slipped it into her coat pocket, and stepped out into the night. Gravel crunched under her boots as the wind whispered through the trees. The driver's door of the sedan opened. Charles Whitmore emerged, tall, immaculate, his suit pressed, his smile cruel and calm. The darkness didn't touch him. If anything, it seemed to serve him, cloaking him like a king wrapped in velvet. "Detective Monroe," he said smoothly, "you've been persistent, admirable, really, but this is where it ends." Riley's voice was steady, though her heart raced. "You've been burying people along this road for decades, Whitmore. Tonight, it's your turn." Whitmore chuckled softly. "Such fire. But you don't have what it takes. You think you're different from the others who tried. But in the end, you'll be nothing more than another file, closed and forgotten." Riley raised her gun. "I've got enough. The boy you left in the lodge survived. He's going to testify." For the first time, Whitmore's smile faltered, just a flicker. Then he recovered, shaking his head. "No jury will believe him. Not against me." "Maybe not a jury," Riley said, stepping closer. "But the court of public opinion. They'll see you for what you are. The mask is cracking, Charles." His eyes hardened, the charm gone. "You think you can stop me with a witness, a diary, a photograph?" Riley held his gaze. "No, I'll stop you with the truth." A sound cut through the night tires screeching. Another set of headlights appeared, racing down Route 19. Daniel Vega's car skidded to a halt behind Riley, his figure emerging with his arm still in a sling, his gun in his good hand. "Step away from her," Vega shouted. Whitmore's jaw tightened. "Ah, the loyal partner. I wondered if you'd survive." Vega limped forward, his eyes blazing. "I survived because you're sloppy, and now you're done." Whitmore laughed, the sound hollow. "You think this ends with an arrest? Even if you put me in cuffs, I'll be out before the ink is dry. I have judges, lawyers, politicians all in my pocket. I've been untouchable for 40 years. Do you really think tonight changes that?" Riley's voice was ice. "Yes, because tonight, the world's watching." Whitmore blinked. Vega grinned grimly, tapping his sling. A small camera lens glinted from the fabric. "Live feed, councilman. Straight to the precinct servers. Everything you've said tonight is recorded." For the first time, panic flashed in Whitmore's eyes. His mask cracked. "You bastards," he hissed. "You think you've won." He lunged toward Riley, his hand reaching for her gun. The struggle was fast, violent. Gravel sprayed as they grappled, Riley's weapon slipping from her hand. Whitmore's strength was terrifying. His hadn't dulled him. He slammed her against the hood of her car, his grip tightening around her throat. "You'll never bury me," he snarled. Vega staggered forward, raising his gun. His shot rang out, the bullet tearing through Whitmore's shoulder. Whitmore roared, stumbling back, clutching the wound. Riley seized the moment, shoving him hard to the ground. She snapped the cuffs onto his wrists, her breath ragged, her heart hammering. Charles Whitmore lay in the gravel, blood soaking his pristine suit, his eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over," he spat. "You think you've beaten me, but I'll walk. I always walk." Riley leaned close, her voice steady. "Not this time." The trial was swift, the evidence overwhelming. The video of Whitmore's threats, combined with survivor testimony and the graves unearthed at the lodge, painted a picture too damning to ignore. For weeks, the city buzzed. Headlines screamed, "Councilman exposed as Route 19 killer." Families of the victims wept in court as verdicts were read. Whitmore sat stone-faced, his mask finally shattered, his power stripped away. When the jury foreman spoke the words "guilty on all counts," Riley felt a weight lift from her chest. 40 years of silence broken. Months later, Riley stood once more on Route 19. The highway was quiet, the breeze rustling through the trees. Fresh flowers lay on Maggie Doyle's grave, their petals bright against the grass. Vega stood beside her, his arm mostly healed, a faint scar on his shoulder. "We did it," he said softly. Riley nodded. For them, they stood in silence, listening to the wind, the ghosts of the past finally at peace. Or so they thought. One rainy evening, Riley returned home to find a plain envelope waiting on her doorstep. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Whitmore in prison blues, sitting in a visitor's room, his smile wide and unbroken. On the back, scrawled in black ink, were 3 words: "It's not over." Riley's breath caught, because even behind bars, Charles Whitmore still had friends, still had power, and Route 19's ghosts weren't finished yet.